God, the supernatural, yes. Although, really, nothing is supernatural for God. It's supernatural for us. You ever think about that? Talk about the natural and the supernatural. God's not supernatural. We categorize him as supernatural, Miss Kupel. Good to see you, Miss Kupel. We categorize him like that. That's our language. But everything's, the supernatural realm is perfectly natural for God. If you ever think about it, or if you do think about it, and maybe you have today. So, God, let me get my PowerPoint here. Get to my PowerPoint. Where do we? Okay, the meaning of God or the definition. And I'll admit to you that's not the best definition, but that's the definition I believe that I'm putting on the quiz. Okay, but basically, a being. Actually, I should say being itself, existence, itself is God. As we'll learn, his existence is his essence. Okay, to exist is what he is. Okay, they're identical. So even to say that God is a being is, well, kind of the best we can do with language, but it's really not the best because God is not like a separate being apart from us. Like when we talk about the supreme being, because we're all beings too. We're human beings. Okay, but God is not a being in that sense. He exists of himself, as hopefully I'll make clear in a moment. All right. So, I was talking about that. I'm not going to talk about I give you the root of if you're curious where the word God comes from, go all the way back to Proto-Indo-European of our language family. English is part of the Indo-European family. I think I've mentioned that before, maybe, stretching from northern India to Europe. Okay, there are a bunch of languages. I'm sorry, it's a little too dark for me. I'm getting depressed. Anyways, so scholars kind of try and figure out what might have been the original word that all the words from all these different Indo-European languages, English, German, Latin, Italian, Armenian, Hindi, So Gutom with an asterisk, which means it's theorized, okay? They're not sure, but they think that Gutom, something called upon or invoked, prayed to, I guess you could say. Yeah. So the ultimate meaning of God, at least in the Indo-European language family, I don't know about the other language families, is something that you invoke, you call upon to do stuff for you. Gutom. You recognize the superiority of this being, that it can do stuff for you that you can't do. All right. Don't worry about these. I'm going to move on. We have to get a little bit philosophical here just to understand what I'm talking about. Typically, there's a distinction between essence and existence. Not with God, Ms. Whalen, as I just said, right? Not with God, but certainly with us, okay? Essence, other words we can use for that. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Essence is what something is in order to be what it is. All right? What something is. You're a human being. In order to be a human being, Ms. Mostiller, you have to be one. Right? No, you're not sure? Okay, well, okay, fine, yeah. No, I guess you could be an arachnid who wants to be a human being. Your nature is as an arachnid, or a lobster or something. But I think, it just seems logical that in order to be something, you have to have the nature or the essence of something, right, Ms. Mexcatitla Martinez? A spider has to have spiderness. A dog has to have dogginess. A human has to have humanness in order to have that nature, in order, Ms. Suter, to be it. Yes, essence. from the Latin word, as you can see, esse, which means to be. Sum esse, okay? Sum est, sumus, estis, sunt. You already know these words. You speak Spanish. Soy, eres, es. Somos, somos. I forget what's the vosotros form. I forget what the vosotros form is for to be. Sad. Well, anyways, son. Okay, similar, very similar, right? Because Spanish is descended from Latin. Okay, so in some ways you already know these words. The conjugation of so esse, essentia, what something is, but whether what something is, Mr. Cotillo, is another question than if it actually exists. Okay, I can talk to you all day about unicorns. All right, a horse with one horn coming out of its head, right? Right? No, not. You know, or I can conduct a whole class about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And act like she really existed. The whole Buffy universe. And people do these things. You go to these conventions and people read papers about, I don't know, Star Wars or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or what's the other one, the vampire one? Not Harry Potter, but the vampire one with what's her name and the other guy. The movie stunk. I didn't watch any of the movies. Well, whatever. Huh? Yeah, Twilight. With the vampire and the war with the werewolves and stuff like that, and all that stuff. Anyway. Yeah, you can talk about that stuff. I can give lectures on unicorns, what they look like, what their nature might be, how they became unicorns, why there would be unicorns, what we can know about them. Yeah, just like I can talk about a lot of things that I can conceive and imagine. That's imagination. All sorts of things. Our brains are like Cuisinarts. We can take all sorts of concepts and things that we know in reality and mash them up. I mentioned a unicorn. I mentioned werewolves. A man who's both a wolf and a man. Vampires. Undead humans that want to eat blood. Anyways. But whether a unicorn exists or not, that's another question. Existence is a distinct question from essence. To be in reality, not just to be what you are, but to be in reality. You are now, Mr. Crawford, a human being. Okay? But I'm going to imagine I'm not, this, I'm not trying to make, I won't use you as an example. I'll use the group, because then you don't know who I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about it. No, but I'm going to imagine that basically the average age in the room is around 20-ish, right? 20-something. So I think it's safe to say that around 20-some years ago, there was no you. There was no you to be you. You understand what I'm saying? Your nature couldn't exist because you didn't exist. Essence and existence. To actually have being in reality. Ex sisto, ex out of, and sisto to make something stand up. So to stand out of, to stand forward, Ms. Furla. It's not just possible that something exists. It now reveals itself. It does exist, okay? And if you want to think biologically, you kind of literally ex-sistoed because you did come forward or kind of stand out in a way from your mother's womb. You started to exist. Not saying you didn't exist before, So I'm a Catholic theologian, so life begins at conception. I don't want to get the Archbishop all over me. No. I'm not done making fun of it. I believe it as well. But that is still an open question. When does the human life start to exist? You've got the human nature, okay? The church teaches that we accept from conception because it's all there, all right? But for some cultures, no, the human person doesn't exist until birth. Like I had a girlfriend who was Korean, and they don't start like counting. Well, actually no, I shouldn't say that. They do start counting in the womb because she was already considered like a year old. Okay, forget my example. That was garbage. Sorry, Brianna. I screwed that up. Oh, and I do want to give thanks, a shout out to Dr. Messina in the philosophy religious studies department for helping me, for explaining these different meanings, because these are all sorts. I did do philosophy as an undergrad because I wanted to be a priest, and you have to have a degree in philosophy. But I did not become a philosopher. But as a theologian, I have to engage in a lot of philosophical thinking and understand a lot of philosophical language. But some of it is, I'm not an expert, so I look to people who have expertise, like Dr. Pat Messina here. And also another guy, Brandon Zimmerman, who's a friend of mine, who's teaching at, I think, the University of Dallas now, down in Texas. Anyways, because different words can be used. We can say essence, Mr. Walker. I can say nature. I can say substance. I can also say being. And they can all be kind of understood in the same way, right? So it can get confusing because philosophically, each of those words does mean something kind of different. There's a different texture. So try to be careful with my language. I'm going to prefer to use the word essence, but sometimes I'll use the word nature as well. All right? Okay. Just so you know. So we have essence and existence. All right? But at the basis of both of these is what's called ens, which literally means being. It's the adjectival, or what you might call the gerund. Ms. Ledbetter. How's it going? Is it? The gerund of the verb to be. Ens. Just being. Okay? And this is a famous distinction and discussion by this guy, famous guy. I don't think I've mentioned Aquinas before, have I? I don't think I have. No, I don't think, yeah. St. Thomas Aquinas, okay? You can see his dates. He lived back in the 13th century. That's a picture of him. I don't know how accurate it is. I doubt it's that accurate, but it's a picture of him, all right? What he might have looked like. We do know he was kind of fat because, at his desk, they had to cut out a circle so his belly could fit up to his desk when he would write, so we know he was kind of chubby, apparently. And he was also very quiet. They used to call him the dumb ox because he was so fat and big. Not, I'm fat, so, F-A-T, not P-H-A-T, although I am fat too, so. Anyways, they called him the dumb ox, not dumb stupid. Dumb is in the sense of mute, because he didn't talk very much. He's very quiet. All right, so those are a couple of things that we do know about his personality. But he was apparently, he left a bunch of writings. He was a very smart guy. And he's known as like the common doctor, the common teacher of the church, because he wrote one of these works that he wrote is called the Summa Theologiae, the summary of theology. Okay, in older forms, you'll see it as Summa Theologica. All right, both are fine. But the summary of theology, and it was his attempt to kind of outline all of theology, what we can know about God mainly from reason, the application of human reason to the questions of faith using philosophy, okay, which he tried to do. He never finished it. He died before he could finish it, so it's in 3 books. And he meant it as like an introduction. This is supposed to be an introductory work, but if you ever look at it, go online. It's all online. It's on public domain. It's not easy reading, but it's not bad either. You can understand it. And basically, the way you did things in the Middle Ages at the universities, when universities started, is you would ask a question, you would pose a question, like, is there one God or three gods? Or, excuse me, is there one God or many gods? Let's put it that way. And then you would present the arguments in favor of the view that you're not going to support. So, yes, it would seem that there are many gods and not just one God because of blah, 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 blah. Number two, another argument for there being many gods and not just one God, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you line up some arguments, and then you respond to them and say why you don't think, well, you give your idea or your response. No, I think there is one God, but now I'm going to say why. And then you respond to the arguments that are brought up against your view. Okay, so you have to prove it, show that it's rational, that it's defensible. Okay. So that's how his stuff is organized. Okay, anyways. In the first book, this is Summa Theologiae Part 1. This is Book 1 and questions 2 to 4. Of course, he has to start with, since it's a summary of theology, and theology is the study of God, he starts with the question of God. What is God? Can we know God exists? What is God's nature? What is his essence? Etc. and so forth. And so if you're curious, you can look at questions 2 to 4. But he makes this distinction. There's essentia and esse. Essentia, what something is. Esse, that it is. But then whatever is ens. I guess you could say the possibility of being is ens. Being itself. Okay? It's comprehensive. I didn't mention that. All right. Just thinking of stuff I might want to skip over and move on to what my more important points. All right, yeah. And for us, they're not identical. They're distinct. But for God, they are. God is neither essence nor esse. Yes, God has a divine essence, a godly essence, and he does exist. He does exist because, for God to be a God who didn't exist, kind of pointless. What kind of God is that? It's like, that's not a very powerful God that could not, doesn't really exist, if you understand the divine essence to be like all powerful, the supremest being, the supreme being can't exist, So he has esse. But ultimately, God's essence, his essentia, is identical with ens itself, existence itself. God's nature is to exist. He is the root and source of all existence. So that anything should exist is because there is a God, basically, which you can know through human reason, but you can't necessarily know. Believe it or not, Aquinas is very clear that you can't directly prove the existence of God. You can't know it, obviously. You can know it through the human reason. He accepted the fact there could be people who are atheists or agnostics who just can't, through their own reason, know it. Okay? So that's possible. But it's also, you can rationally reason to the belief. You can think it through and think that if all things exist and they might not have existed at all, okay, what do we call the source, or what is the source of existence itself? Where is it all coming from? Ultimately, okay? The last, you want the last, ultimate, okay? That there's no other. You've stopped. You've reached the end point. And the word we use for that being, Mr. Clyde, is God. You can use any other word. Make up any other word from any other language. Allah, Elohe, anything. any other language on the planet. The word doesn't matter because we make up words. All right, God doesn't make up words. We need language and concepts to understand it. And because it's a being, personal, it's active. It's active. It's not potential. Right? Like God could okay, I can reason that there could be a God. God could exist. Okay. But if he is God, if you accept that there is a divine nature which has all perfections, and to exist is kind of a perfection. It's better to exist than not, I would imagine. I'm assuming. I could be wrong. Yeah. Maybe there are some people walking around saying, "Oh, I hate being alive. I hate existing." But it seems to be assumed philosophically that existence makes us better, is a perfection, as they say in philosophy. For God to lack that perfection of existence wouldn't make any sense. Of course he'd have it, and he'd have it to the fullest degree. He'd even be it. And when I say he, I'm assuming the revelation of the Bible that God, that uses the, he, male language for God. But God doesn't have any sex, all right? But that's the way he revealed himself to Israel, so that's what I'm going to go with. But I don't mean anything, not trying to downgrade anyone else, you know what I'm saying? But anyways, so God is the principle of his own existence. That's what it means to say that he is ends itself. His essence is to exist. He's the principle of his own existence. He's identical to existence. And it makes sense that he would have to be, because otherwise, where is he taking his existence from? If God receives his existence, ends from somewhere else, Mr. Smith, who's giving it to him? What's giving it to him? And if that who or what, if God has to go and get existence from that other thing, he ain't God anymore, I don't think. I'm going to pray to that thing that gives God existence. We've now reached the ultimate. Keep going, baby. Call that God. The other thing's not God then, if he receives his existence from something else. Yes. Go away. Sorry. So nothing imparts being to God. He is being. And he gives it to everything. Okay? Us, the stones of this building, okay, the planets, the black holes, the quasars, the blazars, the magnetars, the atoms, the boson particles in the atoms, okay? They all exist because God wills them to exist. He wishes to impart existence to them. They are not God. So Christianity and Judaism as well is not a pantheistic religion like, say, Hinduism, okay, and certain types of maybe New Age. Does anyone call it New Age anymore? Spirituality, but whatever. Some people think that everything is God. The trees are God. Because of course God's everywhere, Mr. Heisler, right? So that makes sense. If God is everywhere, he's present everywhere, then everything has to be him. Even you. Namaste. Don't you say that namaste at the end of yoga and maybe the beginning of yoga? Anybody? No one? Yeah, Miss Suter? Do you know what it means? Your yogi tell you what it means? Huh? 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 Well, we're here, Miss Suter. I can't hear you. What did you say? No. Why? Why didn't he or she tell you what namaste, this word you're saying and what you're doing, what it means? Anyways. Oh, it's come Sanskrit, ancient old language from Hinduism, namatite, which is pronounced namaste, which means namatite, I bow to you. Meaning I bow to the God within you, because God is present in everything. Pantheism. All is God. And the right hand represents the divine, and the left represents the material, and they're united in you. So I'm not sure if I, as a Christian, would be doing that in yoga class. I would think of something else to do. I mean, I guess I could reinterpret it in an Orthodox Christian way, but no, Judaism and Christianity are not pantheistic. God is present. Present. Think about it. Presence doesn't mean existence. It doesn't mean you exist as that thing. Okay, I'm present in this room, but I'm not this room. All right. And it's kind of the same thing with God. God is present as the source of existence to everything, to you, to the tables, well, at least what the tables are made out of, to the trees and bushes outside, to the bees and the birds and stars and whatever. But he is not them. He doesn't have to be them. He's perfectly existent. He doesn't need to be anything else. Okay? So he imparts esse from his ends, from him being ends. And so Aquinas comes up with this famous definition of God. Deus est, ipsum esse, per se, subsistens, Ms. Galdi. You speak, assume Galdi, is that Italian? You speak any? Your parents? Grandparents? A lot, or? Oh, I'm sorry. May they rest in peace. Okay. Because, Italian is the direct descendant of Latin, okay? It's the closest of the languages. Well, Sardinian is closer, probably. I don't say probably. It is closer. But Italian's very close, okay? So you already, and, if you know Spanish, you already know these words. Dios es. A lot of you taking Spanish. So Dios es. God is, right? Dios es. Deus est. Ipsum, well, that's kind of hard. Well, like ipse means, like to be used as a pronoun like he or that or which, Esse, that's a little bit harder because it's you have two verbs for to be in Spanish, and a lot of like esse, you have ser and estar, right? But it's easier in Italian, Ms. Galdi, because essere, to be. So to be per se, in and of itself, that word, we use that all the time in English, Well, Dr. Dunn's classes aren't boring per se, but in and of itself, okay, per se. Subsistence, to subsist. We use the same word in English that we get from Latin. That one you probably don't know because, we don't use it very much in English. Okay, but subsist is kind of the same thing as exist. Kind of. It has a different texture of meaning philosophically. But, okay, so we can kind of put this together. Even though you don't speak Latin or maybe have never studied it, start putting it together. God is, where's my notes? Oh, okay. That which is esse, existence. Use the word esse, not ends, but just go with it. God is that which is existing, esse, per se, of itself, in and of itself, subsisting. All right, now what does that mean? Well, there are other ways to put it. Okay? God is the one who is, existing of himself. Okay? God is, what we call God is that being that is, really is, not just conceptually, like a unicorn, is, and how does he exist of himself? He exists of himself, per se. Now, it's another way to put it. Maybe simpler English. God exists in and of himself, Mr. Cotillo. All right. If I were trying to explain it to somebody on the streets of Philly, God exists in and of himself. He doesn't get existence from anywhere else. He is existence, being. He has his own being as his nature. Deus est ipsum esse per se subsistens. Okay? And maybe I do give you the definition of, oh, I don't, subsist. If you're curious what subsist means, I don't give it on the PowerPoint. Well, you know what? I just won't ask it on the quiz. Moving on. It's not huge. I already told you. It basically means like to exist. It's just a different form. There is, as I said, a different texture that can be used, but I'm not gonna get into much inside baseball. If existence is unitary, I think there's only one existence. But I don't know, Ms. Arnold. That's up for grabs these days. Philosophers debate. For a long, long time. Is existence unitary? Is there just one existence, one way to exist? God bless you, Ms. Mostel. But then you get people like Jean-Paul Sartre who come along, and the existentialist philosophers who say, no, existence can be whatever you want it to be. You can recreate yourself. Okay? And a lot of that is where we get into postmodernism, and we might even be postmodernism. I don't know. The postmodern philosophy would say, yeah, reality is creatable. It's deconstructible. You can deconstruct it and then build it back up the way you want. And I think we're seeing, the results of this. People and things and issues that are coming up in our culture. I'm not judging anything. I'm not saying good or bad or whatever, yes or no. I'm just saying that some of these ideas are starting to like reach the minds of regular people, right? And some people don't know what to do with this, because I think our common assumption is existence is existence. Something either is or it isn't, right, Ms. Mexcatitla? It is or it isn't, It isn't, this way now, but then another way later, like a plant is always a plant. It's just, its nature is to be a plant, to be planty. It doesn't become a platypus, A star doesn't become, I don't know, a jelly bean, It exists as a star, always. A jelly bean. Well, a jelly bean, you make jelly beans. It's maybe not the best example, but once it's a jelly bean, it's either a jelly bean or it's not, We'll just go with it for now, wherever you stand on the subject. From the perspective of Christian philosophy, existence is unitary. Because God is unitary. There's God, there's a God who exists. Why would you need another? As soon as you have another God who also is existence, well, now you have two existences, okay. But why? Monotheism, the belief in one God, because existence is also unitary, singular. There's only one existence, and God is identical to that. There's only one God. It stands to reason. And this is the faith of Israel in the Bible, but the Jews didn't reason to this. Okay, this is not, you're not going to find any of this in the sacred scriptures. All right, the Jews experienced it, and it took a long time for them to understand it because, if you read the Bible, the earliest writings in the Old Testament, there was kind of the recognition that there could be other gods, just like there are many types of human beings in the world, or whatever. Could be other gods as well, but we only worship Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it was really through the prophets who were like, no, knuckleheads, there's only one God. And I don't know how the prophets knew that other than revelation. They just had this connection to God that they were able to see the logic of it, that no, to be God means God, not gods. All right, there's not more than one. He's perfect. If he's perfect, then he's unitary. And they had to keep ramming that idea into the minds of the Jews, their fellow Jews. So that was a fundamental idea of ancient Israel. All right. And this God, because he, well, God bless you. I think I mentioned this already. God is not possibly God or potentially God. He is actually God. So here we get into philosophical ideas of possibility, which philosophers call potency, from the word posse, to be able. Okay, possum posse, yes. Possibility. It's another word for possibility, but I'm giving you the philosophical term potency. All right, and then actuality, to do something. Ago simply means to do in Latin. Simply means to do. You keep calling me, but anyways, that's all it means. So actuality means doing. All right. So potency, being able to do something, and actuality, doing it. All right. I mean, I'm able to run and jump and hit and catch things. I'm able to, I have the potency, but I don't have the actuality to play in the NFL. I could try. I could try. To open practice or open whatever. Have a good day, miss. You know, we all have potency. We can do a lot of things with our lives. You can do anything with your life, right? That's what you're told when you're in, kindergarten and stuff. You can do anything. Okay. Oh, that's true, I guess. What if you only grow up and you're like 5'5" and you really want to play basketball? Teacher told me I can do anything I want in my life. Well, you could, maybe they should start like basketball leagues, like a professional basketball league for short people. Not little people, maybe for little people as well. But I'm talking about people who are just short. They can't make it into the NBA. And then have like professional football league for people who are like me, fat, not agile, have stone hands. We're out. No, why not? Possible. Anyways, God is not potentially God, and there are no possibilities in him. So when we think about other things that perfect us, like knowledge, wisdom, goodness, truth, knowing reality as it truly is, power, et cetera, and so forth, okay? Things that are, I don't mean power in a bad sense, like abusive power. I just mean, the ability to exert your will to do something. For God, it's never a question of possibility. For us, it is. We have to work at it, obviously. We have to even use tools to get it to do what we want, get to do things that we want. For God, it's not a potency, it's an actuality. When God wills something, it simply is according to how he wills it. God does not have to take power from anything, okay? He simply has it completely. He has all knowledge, okay? He can foresee all possibilities, and the possibilities. I know that to me, when I think about it, would drive me into a madhouse if I tried to think about everything God could foresee and not see. And theologians and philosophers kind of wrap themselves into pretzels trying to figure out, God's, knowledge of the future. Does he preordain it? Does he predestine it? Can he change it? All right, okay. Sometimes you just got to step back from the mystery and just be like, just I don't that our brains can't understand that. If God has knowledge, he has knowledge perfectly, all knowledge perfectly. And all of these things, these perfections, exist in him actually. They are active. There's done by God. There's nothing that God needs to do. There's nothing that God needs to have done for him. He is, in the famous statement, another Latin statement, actus purus ascendi, Mr. Lee. Actus purus. Actus, act, purus, pure. Ascendi, well, we already know this, what this is, being, okay? He is the pure act of being. He's being to the fullest, whatever, I guess. Realized perfection. Realized perfection. All right. So that and follows from that, and I'm just going to hop, skip, and jump through this, but that there are no imperfections in God. Then, if he's not lacking in anything, so anything that would be a lack, is not even a question when talking about God, and that doesn't mean I know how it is for God. All right, I understand. I'm just a monkey who fell out of a tree maybe 500,000 years ago. Well, not me, but my ancestors, and wandered around and then eventually ended up on the island of Ireland, what they called Ireland. And here I am, I know I'm not God, and that language is still imperfect. Okay. So I don't know how this is experienced by God. But I can know something about what's going on, I think. Just from reason, because it makes sense about if there is a God, this is how a God should be. Okay, and and then we have revelation in the Bible where God seems to be like saying, "Yeah, I'm like that," confirming it, what we can know through reason. So, if God is, what was I talking about here? Yeah, he has no imperfections. So God is beyond time and space. Okay. Because time and space are qualities of the physical world, the material world. I mean, time and space start to exist when the universe starts to exist, okay? But God doesn't start to exist. He his existence. So the question of a before or an after with God makes no sense. The question makes no sense. We can ask it and think about it, but for us it makes sense because we came into existence. The universe came into existence at a certain point, 13 point something billion years ago. Okay. And with the extension of space, we started to have time as well. Time and space are two sides of the same coin. What is time? Yes. I think what is time? If I ask you what time is, it's basically a kind of extension of space. But God's not confined by those things. He has to be limitless by definition because he's not imperfect. To have a limit is an imperfection. Hence, that's why I'm not a pantheist, because logically it doesn't make sense to me. Any God that could be limited by the physical universe, to me, is not fully a God. There's a limit. If God extends just to the boundaries of the known cosmos, even though the cosmos is absolutely huge. I think I was watching a video and it said like 92 billion light years and still expanding. So, anyways, so God does not change. His existence does not change. Change is also not a question from God to become different, because the question would be, well, what else is he going to become? A better God? Is there like a God 2.0? Is there is it like with, Microsoft, you get an update, Ms. Arnold, you download the new update of God, hey, we got a better God for you here, a nicer God, not that Old Testament God who wants to kill your children, but a brand new spanking God. Okay. All right. Well, some people do believe in, there are process theologians who posit that God does change. It's of his nature to change, become different. I don't think it's really gone anywhere. They're kind of spinning their wheels because I try to. It's a helpful way to explain like evil. Why is there cancer? Why do people die? Why is there suffering? Why would God tell in the Old Testament? Tell the Israelites to kill all the Canaanites, but then Jesus is like, turn the other cheek, right? Because God changed. He became different. Maybe the birth of a son calmed him down. I don't know. That's a Lewis Black joke, anyways. I have to give credit where credit is due. God changed. He, even in his moral, ethical understanding, Okay, but doesn't really work for me. God can become different. He can become something that he's not. And if he can become better, it's always with process theology, like God becomes better, right? Mezmexcatitla, he goes from the Old Testament telling Abraham to kill his kid and offer his kid up as a sacrifice to him, right? Abraham and Isaac, the story where Abraham is told to go and sacrifice Isaac to God in the book of Genesis, But then he goes to the God of love in the New Testament. I love you. I'm like a father. I'm merciful. I love you to death, Come back to me. Okay. But it's always like good change, right? Positive change. But there can be regressive change too, can't there? Who's to say that, God might be like, all right, I've done 2,000 years of the mercy shtick. They still won't listen to me. Let's go back to the Old Testament eye for an eye. And really knuckle down, right, Ms. Pinto, Let's do that again. Why not? I mean, in theory, there's no reason why God couldn't, if he's changeable. But the problem of evil, why is there a problem of the question of evil, or I should say imperfections? Because we instinctively, even if you're an atheist, there is no God. However, when it comes to the question, someone asks you, well, why don't I believe in God? A lot of times, I'm not saying it's the only answer, but a lot of times I've heard atheists in debates on YouTube and stuff, because what God would allow cancer, what God would allow Ebola, what God would allow blah 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 blah. Exactly. They know. Even the person who's an atheist knows that it's not much of a God if he says, I am this, but, well, only this week. And next week I might change my mind. No, if God is merciful, if God is good, Mr. Walker, if God is truthful, if God is beautiful, he always is. He cannot not be. That's part of his nature. Completely perfect. Then the question of evil becomes a problem. And it is a question. I'm not going to talk about it now, but, the one thing I would say is that, driving on my way over here, Mr. Casper, I saw a few hundred reasons for evil on my way over here that I could point the finger at first, especially the one in my rearview mirror that I saw. Yes. No one seems to. And when we get to cancer and it's always the argument. I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but usually people go right for the worst case scenario, like some little child who has cancer who's dying, right? What God would allow that? I don't know, but I don't think God detonated thousands upon thousands of nuclear and atomic bombs, testing them in New Mexico, Western China, Siberia, blah, 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 and irradiated the whole planet. So that we're all irradiated. We all have radiation in us. That wasn't there before they started doing it. You health people will love this. How do I know this? Because you health people will love this. They're able to, because of it, they're able, the uranium, they can measure, it decays, right? It decays at a certain rate. And in human cells, because it's there, because of all the atomic tests over from the 1950s until around by the 80s, I think they pretty much stopped them by the 90s. They're not really doing them anymore, unless you're North Korea, someplace like that. They can see the rate of decay in our cells, and they could map how fast our cells are replaced in the human body. It's really cool. So, for example, bone cells take about every 7 years, your complete skeletal system, all the cells basically regenerate, okay, reproduce. Other cells, much faster, like blood cells, cells in your mouth, skin cells. Brain cells never reproduce. That's why you got to protect the brain. But they had no way, and they found out, oh, wait a second, why is uranium there? Or forever chemicals. You hear about forever chemicals? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that must be God's doing, right? All those cancer patients couldn't have anything with the junk that we are doing to ourselves. Anyways, enough preaching, Ms. Mexcatitla. Anyways, so change. So God is as he is. His existence doesn't turn on and off like a light switch. Okay? And if he exists, it exists in fullness. So whatever perfection he has, it stands to reason he should have in fullness. Okay? All right. God, however, I'm going to pass over that little Star Trek thing. But God, however, is not a what. A what. He is a who. He is a who. That is maybe not so obvious, because even in like some of the ancient Greek philosophers and stuff like that, they kind of believe, they were able to reason to the existence of one God, completely perfect, stuff like that. So that was the God of the philosophers. The common people, believed in all sorts of different gods, but they were philosophers. Anyways, but this God was static, wasn't pure act. The God, for them to be perfect, meant he had to be static, not doing anything. So completely remote from any kind of connection to humanity or to the world at all. And also spherical for some reason. I don't know what spheres were like the perfect form, I guess. So we've all been worshiping a basketball all these many, many years, I guess. Anyways, thank God for the Jews. Anyways, but it wasn't personal. Hence, you didn't pray to God. There was not the one God that these philosophers conceived of had no connection at all to humans. Didn't really care. And we kind of still see this in the modern form called deism. A lot of our founding fathers were deists, like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. They talk about God, but they don't mean the Christian or the Jewish God or even a pagan God. They mean the God of reason, the God of philosophy, who, you don't pray to God because why would you? First of all, God doesn't care. Well, God is like the divine clockmaker. He made the machine and just lets it go, and it works the way it works. And he has no more interaction with it. Okay, so there are no miracles. Why would God work them? He's not going to change his divine plan for you. So miracles are, non-existent. You don't pray. There's nothing to pray to for God, nothing to ask him to do. So I think it's more, now we get revelation coming in. And that's why I said, thank God for the Jews, thank God for Israel. Because if you read your Bible, the God of Israel is very much involved. He does very much care about human beings, especially one group of human beings, the sons and daughters of Israel. So that's kind of like a revelation that God is personal. He's relational. The deistic God, the God of philosophy, is not. He's so perfect, he doesn't need anything else. So what does he need a relationship for, Mr. Lee? With anything. Certainly not with us, because he's perfection. But the Israelite God always is pushing for a relationship. He's perfect, but he wants us for some reason. So that's what Israel brings to the table. Okay? A unity. Well, what do I got here? Again, this is not a great definition, but it's a hard word to really define. But I guess this is on the PowerPoint, so I'll just go with it. the name for an enduring and conscious unity of rational action. And I can maybe even simplify that by just say, well, how would I simplify it? Yeah, an enduring unity of rational action. I just think conscious needs to be in there because God is conscious of himself. And God's not just like a big eternal brain hovering up there in the sky or something. So, God is rational, okay? He's conscious, he's persistent, he's enduring, and he's a pure act. So I guess maybe, but what is because we are persons as well, not just God. We're relational. We are a unity. We are one with our nature. Our existence and our nature are distinct, but they're unified in you. And you're conscious of that. You're conscious that you exist. You're conscious of it. I hope. Seem to be. We know we exist. Right? And God is all like that. But again, God is a person in the most perfect sense, yes? There's nothing imperfect about his personhood, his relationality. Okay? Our relationality is limited. I can only relate to you on an individual basis. And even that's kind of hard, but I can't even understand you. You have to tell me what you're thinking, maybe even explain what you're saying, Ms. Mossler, right? Forget about a group. I mean, how do I have a relationship? If I went to what's Phillies Stadium? Who owns Phillies Stadium? The Phillies Stadium. They just call. What is it called? Just Phillies Stadium? I forget. Huh? It's Citizen. Okay, whatever. Let's say I went, to the baseball stadium where the Phillies play. Okay, let's put it that. 50,000 people there in the bleachers. All right, and I'm going to relate to them. I'm going to have a relationship with every one of you. What does that mean? Does that even mean anything? It's like, how? How am I going to have a relationship with 50,000 people? Well, I can qualify it, Mr. Heisler, and say, I won't have a meaningful relationship with you. But so we're even limited in our personhood about how we can relate to others, and we see that in very, I know, polyamory is kind of like the thing. Is it still the thing, polyamory? But, historically, no, human cultures, well, at least Western culture, I should say, Ms. Arnold, was like, pretty much clear that a permanent, not permanent relationship, but a perfect relationship is permanent between one person and another, because that's basically all you can handle, I guess, until you have kids, and that ruins that. You got all the little buggers running around, and anyways. And I know other cultures are different, because you have polygamous cultures where people have more than one wife, more than one husband, stuff like that. So people see it differently. But I think it's generally, my point is made, generally true. God is perfect person as well. He can relate to anything he wills to, as much as he wills, in the way that he wills. All right. So it's kind of like a philosophical discussion or exposition of God. But then we got Mr. Smith, the monkey in the wrench. The monkey in the wrench. This guy. This guy shows up, Jesus. Okay, Jesus the Jew. Now we have a paradox. A paradox. Okay? And you know what a paradox is? Where you put the boats, right? Put a couple of boats in the paradox. No, a paradox is something that's true that doesn't seem like it could be true. Okay? It's true, but it doesn't seem like it could be true. It's paradoxical. You have them in mathematics. There are paradoxes. Not that I could tell you any because I stink at math, but you have them in science. Light, which we're experiencing right now, is about the wave and a particle. We still don't know how it can be like that, how it acts both ways, is both ways. It's a scientific paradox. All right. So in the natural world, there are paradoxes. God is a paradox. God, why? Because Jesus shows up, Jesus the Jew. And as we know, the Jews were strict monotheists. There's only one God, right? There's only one God. Very clear. Absolutely clear. Not even a question for faithful Jews. Okay? There's only one God, monotheism. And Jesus was a Jew. Jesus never proclaims or preaches any other God, as you know from the Gospels, Mark and Matthew, that you might have read. Jesus doesn't introduce, like, say, hey, there's this other God I'm going to tell you about who's different. No, Jesus doesn't introduce. He presumes the Jewish God and that this is the true God. Okay? However, as we already know, Jesus seems to accrue certain divine characteristics to himself, and certainly his believers start thinking things over time. So, but it is, that how do you make it work? Because it's clear that there's only one God. So where does Jesus fit in? Because he's not just human, although he was human. That's another question that we'll have to deal with. So he's not the same as the God of Israel, because Jesus, and again, it comes back to Jesus. Even Mr. Walker, the idea of God is changed by Jesus. Yes. Jesus modifies it. Okay? Even the Jewish idea of God, even that basic idea of the one God is modified in the light of this man, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? By the way he talks about the God of Israel, where he talks about his relationship with the God of Israel. So he's not the same as the God of Israel, which Jesus very often calls Father, his Father, and seems to mean it, not in a metaphorical way. Because he never talks about his biological father, Joseph, never once mentions him. He's completely absent from the story of Jesus. His mother pops up all over the place, but Joseph, except for, taking Mary as his wife, Joseph kind of exits the scene after that. He's certainly not, around during the ministry of Jesus. And when Jesus does talk about his parentage, he acknowledges he has a mother. He never acknowledges he has a father, except God, the God of Israel. And people, when you read the Gospels, people are weird. Notice people are weirded out by that. What's the nature of this guy? Who is he? Who is he, Ms. Neff? Still with me? Soldiering through? God bless you, Ms. Neff. Who is he? He's weird. He's unusual. Okay? Even if he never said, I am God, which of course, all right, people look for this, like, Christians get all shaken, like, where does Jesus say he's God in the Gospels? I can't find it. I'm not sure he's God then. All right, well, use your historical imagination and imagine you're, a monotheistic Jew 2,000 years ago, and you see this dude, working miracles and stuff like that, talking about God. Would your immediately jump to conclusion be that, oh, well, he must be God in the flesh? I know the story 2,000 years later. I know what the church teaches about Jesus. Okay? But you want to sometimes read the gospel. The Gospels were written for people. They're still working this out. They just have their experience of Jesus. And so, yeah, probably, according to New Testament scholars, probably Jesus never called himself specifically God. Although I think he kind of alluded to it, like the I am statement to the high priest, which got the high priest all hepped up and angry. But no, because it would have made no sense to first century Jews. They didn't have that conception of God. That to have another God was paganism. They knew that there were people who believed in other gods, okay? But that was paganism. That was nations outside of Israel, and these were false. That was false. So if that's what Jesus was saying, it's obvious you couldn't. What Jew's going to follow that? It's clear they had decided monotheism, but Jesus apparently never dissuades anyone about there is one God. He's not saying, oh, by the way, there are actually two more. I haven't talked about the Holy Spirit yet. Oh, okay. Again, it's the resurrection. Do not underestimate the resurrection. That's what gets things, because again, God shouldn't be able to die. Even if some of his disciples were starting to be like, he has divine powers. He's a man, but he acts like God. What is that? Seeing Jesus, get nailed, get crucified, I would imagine Mr. Smith kind of like, put paid on that idea, right? Forget about Jesus being, a prophet or the Messiah, let alone God, God humiliated, put in a tomb, but the resurrection again changes everything. Jesus is risen, raised from the dead. Okay? He's not made a God. It's not God makes him a God or something. Okay? Because read the stories. It's never presented as some kind of transformation where the human Jesus who was killed is put in the tomb and now he's divine. No, it's the same Jesus before and after. Okay? But there is a difference after the resurrection. Okay? So never, just when you read the resurrection stories, whether in Matthew or Mark or John or Luke, notice that they don't really seem to, they don't present it as like a transformation. Like, yeah, God showed his approval of Jesus or made Jesus into a God like you find in pagan myths. He was so great to God that God awarded him divinity. It's never told that way. It's always, there's a unity. He was what he was before, but we admit we didn't understand. And you see that in the Gospels here and there, where the author will say, Jesus said this, Jesus did this. At the time, we didn't understand. But when he was raised from the dead, we started to. Started to. Didn't have it all figured out, though. All right. Well, I talked about that. Anyways, is there anything more I want to say? All right, yeah, I'll continue on Thursday. I'll end here. God bless you all. Good to see you all. Yeah. Have a good day, miss. Have a good day, miss. Good to see you. Good to see you. Have a good day. Good day. Good to see you. Good day, sir. You're welcome, sir. Have a good day, guys. Thanks. Excuse me. Da 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 dee, da 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 doo. La da 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 da.